Okay, and so how this is going to work is we're actually doing the show, and so you're going to hear me do some resets, which is radio talk, and we're actually going to pretend like we're taking a break, but we're not, and then I'll say, welcome back. So this is, just go with it, okay? Just go with it. All right, are we ready? Who's giving me a cue? We're ready. All right. Welcome to Schools In. I'm Denise Pope, Senior Lecturer at the Stanford Graduate School of Education, and I am here with my co-host, Dan Schwartz, who is the Dean at the Stanford Graduate School of Education.
Doctor goes to Washington Pope.
Doctor goes to Washington. Why are you saying that, Dan?
Because we are recording in Washington, D.C., and we're talking about leadership.
And we are in front of a live audience for the first time with this show. Woo!
So is it possible to blush for like 25 straight minutes?
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. I have a question for you, Dan. Yeah, I'm going to ask you first. I'm going to do this. Did you ever run for office, for any kind of leadership position? Did you have to participate in some kind of an election for a role that you were seeking?
I was junior high president.
No.
Yes, I was. There was basically ninth grade girls forced me into running for president, and I won.
Dan, that's shocking to me that anyone could convince you to do anything that you didn't want to do.
I know the turn what you were gonna say. Shocking me that you got elected to anything.
No. So
how about you?
I have a sad story.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember if it was middle school or high school, but I was running for class president. And my maiden name, my name at the time was Denise Clark. And I just had it in my head that you had to get people to remember your name. And I shamelessly threw out Clark candy bars. Clark bars? Do you remember those from like the old days?
Yes.
And I was basically trying to bribe people to vote for me. It was pathetic. It was absolutely pathetic. I didn't talk about any initiatives really. It was just have candy.
Junior high.
I know. But I should have had initiatives or something. Anyway, I lost. They didn't like the Clark bars.
So if your last name was Milky Way,
I think that would have been it. That would have been it. So I had a very short career.
I was also high school president.
Were you? Oh, Dan.
Well, yeah. So it didn't help me get into Stanford.
But never ceases to amaze. Never ceases to amaze me. So you were middle school president and high school president.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I accomplished nothing. But
no major initiatives that you can remember?
No. No.
You must have done something good in middle school that they reelected you.
So I was the sort of guy who made friends with all the different groups. So I didn't sit in a clique. If we had a big issue of the day, I could have brought people together.
See, I wish that we could have more of that in today's society, right? Don't just sit with one group.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try not to get too political, but we actually have a political leader with us today. And I'm really excited to introduce Representative Chrissy Houlahan, who represents Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District. She is an Air Force veteran and a graduate of Stanford, where she earned a degree in engineering. She taught chemistry at Simon Gratz High School in North Philadelphia with Teach for America. She worked at a nonprofit helping underserved students build their literacy skills, and she was elected last fall. Welcome to the show.
Thank
you. Welcome. It's very, very kind of you to join us.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask like an icebreaker question. Harder, teaching chemistry, being Congresswoman, being in the Air Force?
The hardest thing I ever did in my life was teaching chemistry. And I taught chemistry in my mid-40s. I went into Teach for America as a mid-40-year-old person, having already served in the military, having already grown a variety of different businesses and run a variety of different organizations, and the single hardest thing I ever did was teaching chemistry.
So when I started teaching, I got an emergency credential, which means you got a little bit of summer training, and then I went in the classroom. Behavior Is that what was hard?
No, actually, it wasn't. And actually, having never been a teacher before, the learning that there was such a thing as classroom management was sort of an eye-opener for me, having never been a teacher until I was educated through the TFA program. And I also did a little bit of work at a GSE up in Pennsylvania as well. And so, yeah, not to be named GSE. But I think that it really was kind of a remarkable experience to learn that it wasn't really about the children. The kids were amazing. And yes, of course, we had behavioral issues, but the issue was all the other things that were going on around my kids. My kids were 98% free and reduced lunch program kids coming from incredibly challenged a community, going through a lot of transition, the community itself, and the challenge was beyond the children. It was beyond that. I pretty early on learned that my job was largely to be a mom in that particular situation, because one of the reasons I pivoted into running the nonprofit that was focused on early childhood literacy was my kids that I was teaching in 11th grade were reading largely at around the 3rd and 4th grade level, and the realization that I had was I really needed to be focused on literacy rather than on chemistry if I had hope for this generation of kids, and that's why I joined that organization.
Makes a lot of sense. So did the teaching experiences kind of lead you into leadership? So here's, we have lots of convenings at Stanford, and there'll be like a panel of ambassadors, and there'll be government congresspeople speaking. And at the end, they exhort the undergrads to enter public life, to be leaders. Did teaching do this? Did it sort of twist you to think, boy, I should keep stepping up in the ladder to help?
So I'm 3rd generation military. My dad and my grandfather served full careers in the Navy, and I joined the Air Force. I was ROTC at Stanford, and that's how I was able to manage getting through school. And I served right afterwards. So service is part of my DNA and my family heritage. And so as I was growing and scaling businesses, serving also, you can do that by running a business too. And then when I pivoted it back into education, it definitely was the same kind of, with the focus that I thought at that point in time our nation was really craving help in the education space. It was what I thought was our most pressing challenge. I now think we have a much bigger challenge in terms of how our democracy is, in my opinion, unraveling. And so that's why about 2 years ago I decided to do another pivot and to try and lead and serve in this new way. And I realized that I had a little bit of a background in military, a little bit of background in running for-profits and nonprofits, and a little bit in education, and I thought that was a good set of skills to bring to Congress, to bring and serve on our behalves.
So I'm not going to take the bait on democracy unraveling, because it's really tempting, but Denise
we're going to pivot.
Denise is going to pivot.
Yeah,
yes.
We're not going to go there. But I do think your background doing all of those things in the military, and thank you for your service, by the way, and thank you, your family, for their incredible service. I do think your background as a teacher probably can help inform your work at Congress. Do you see specific ways already that's been happening?
There are some kind of crazy ways that it happens in a sense, because you find that you're trying to find ways to work collaboratively with a lot of different people who, it's kind of 435 independent contractors, running around Congress. And in some ways that is a little bit of what you're doing when you're working within a school situation, as opposed to when you're working within an organization where you are part of a management structure or part of a team. So I think there's something there. I actually participated in a hearing on modernization of Congress. And one of the suggestions that I gave in terms of how we can modernize basically takes a page out of how we do some rotational schedules in high school, where here we have 7 different kinds of classes in high school, and every class meets at a different time, 5 days a week, and there's double periods for labs, and there's periods for clubs, and we know how to do this. And in Congress, we don't know how to do that. We have congressional hearings that are happening all the time at the same time. I'm part of 3 committees that in some cases will meet exactly at the same time. And the idea that I need to be there at the same time is pretty impossible. So those are lessons from the classroom that would be useful.
We are speaking with Representative Chrissy Houlahan, and we are talking about her role as a teacher and what she learned as a teacher that's helping inform her work in Congress.
Scheduling.
Scheduling is huge.
Time management.
Huge. Time management. Herding cats, it sounded like a little bit at the beginning, too.
Okay, so I can't resist.
Uh-oh.
Do you think education can play any role in preventing the unraveling of democracy? Or this is something that has to be decided in the political arena?
I think it's essential. I think that part of the reason why we're divided as a nation right now is that we don't have a whole lot of common ground, and I believe that our education defines that common ground that we have. And I think as we strip out things, I'm an engineer, so I'm a big advocate of STEM, but as we strip out things like the arts with, STEAM, then we end up becoming a nation that doesn't have the same kind of common vernacular, the same kind of common way of seeing each other. And so national service is really important, but also making sure that we've equipped everybody to be able to participate in the economy that we're developing is really essential, because otherwise we're leaving people out and behind. And I think that's why we are where we are right now. And we're really broken and divided, and we need to be healed, but we need to be healed by finding the commonalities that we have together.
And I just want to point out, for those who don't know what STEM is, it's science, technology, engineering, and math. And there's a trend to be looking at that as a whole instead of piecemeal, teaching things piecemeal. And STEAM is where you add in the arts and the humanities to make it a whole. So I think it's great that you recognize that we need all of that. And just focusing solely on certain of those subjects isn't going to give us the skills we need for a true democracy.
Well, and even civics, frankly. I didn't ever take a civics class, and I was asleep at the wheel until about 2 years ago in terms of the importance of the role of government. And I think if I had had more of an education in that way, then I would have been a better participant in the citizenry. The last history class that I took, and this is sort of tragic, was in high school. And that's because I was an engineer. And I think it would have been useful to have had a little bit more historical background.
For sure. Wow, that's interesting.
So I don't. If you were going to design your ideal civics experience for a student, it's probably not studying like European 17th century history. Would it be bring them to Washington, let them see what it looks like, see the sausage being made?
So in fact, that actually would be something that I would advocate. I think that when I was teaching, one of the things that I didn't like about the chemistry class that I was asked to instruct was it was very direct instruction oriented, and I'm a hands-on kind of person. Project-based learning was how I learned, and I was frankly pretty upset about the fact that I was being asked to teach with this sort of sit down, close your mouth, listen to what I have to say, and then regurgitate what I just told you. That wasn't okay with me, especially in the sciences. And so, yes, in terms of how you would civically engage kids, today I got to bring actually a Stanford classmate of mine from a year older than me. He brought his daughter into town. She was 11. She sat with me on the floor of the house, and we went through the voting process, and she was like, we want to be yeses, right? We need more yeses, and I told her which side of the aisle everything was. And so, awesome. Yeah, it's really interactive awesome. Experience. Really awesome. So
it's incredible. Yeah. And I just even walking around yesterday here, there were several school groups, and I know it's like a thing in California. I don't know if it's a thing in other states where a lot of 8th graders go to Washington, and it is their first experience kind of learning how this gets done. But I worry that they're just kind of traipsing in and out of museums, and they kind of looked exhausted, and they were kind of on their phones, and some of them were paying attention. But I think if there was more of that, and I know you can't host every 8th grader in the country on the floor, but this idea of how do we want to even make these experiential trips, which schools are doing, all that much better to really teach civics.
So in my district last week, I was home for District Week, and I got the opportunity to visit a grove that does a set of classes for kids in high school that was sort of a model UN, but for government. And they got to go through the process of designing a bill and then arguing for their bill and then setting it up for a vote. And, I'm of the generation of I'm just a bill, schoolhouse rock kind of stuff.
Totally.
Yeah, but I don't think that they are. So these were good experiences for them to have.
Oh, no, that's excellent. We are speaking with Representative Chrissy Houlahan on all things related to education, civics, and particularly with her role as a representative, what she brings to that.
So I would very much like to see beginning teachers to sort of begin to elevate their sight lines towards the things they could do as leaders, perhaps as advocates for their children. They come to the class or seeing their sights at the administration or perhaps government. How do I get people to sort of see this as a possibility?
As a teacher,
Yeah, as a teacher, how do I help them see the possibility that they could actually, 15 years from now, be running something important?
Well, it would be helpful if the people in front of the child looked like them. And I think that that's probably the biggest challenge. And I think it's kind of nice to be in Congress in a session where people increasingly look more and more like our population. And so I think when you're in a classroom, if your teacher sort of looks like you in a way, or tries to make sure that you have experiences where you see other people who look like you, I think that's a way to elevate your sightline and to see that you can be that way. This young woman who I had with me, a young girl, was able to see on, at the speaker's chair, one of the first Native Americans who have been elected to Congress. And that's pretty amazing. That's a pretty amazing thing to elevate your eyesight and to be able to see. It's really, really important.
I agree. And not just important as a role model, but important to have the body representing you being representative of you. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the education issues that are coming before Congress. People were talking about sort of 2018 as the year of the teacher. A lot was going on. But I know there's a lot out there, student loan payments, affordability, certainly accountability. Are you on any of the committees that work with these?
So we have this incredibly diverse new class, and it's not just I'm on the Democratic side. It's not just on the Democratic side, the Republican side as well. There's more than 80 of us who are brand new, and collectively we are more than a quarter of the Congress. And we come from this really amazing set of experiences. Most of us haven't served in government before. The only time I ever ran for anything was as secretary of my 8th grade class, and I lost.
Oh, we have something in common.
Well, candy bars.
I didn't try to throw candy bars. That could have been the reason why I didn't win. But what's remarkable about the diversity of this class is that I chose to be on armed services and foreign affairs and small business because I thought that's what I had to contribute, and that's where my skill sets were largely. Other people, we have a remarkable class, have much deeper heritages in education than I do, and they should be on the sort of education and labor. We shouldn't fight with one another about who gets to be there. We should make sure that we're putting ourselves in the places where we can be most effective.
But some committees are considered more plum than others? Is that what happens?
No, actually what's interesting is the Education and Labor Committee historically has been sort of the place where people don't want to be. There was an absolute brawl for it this time because there were so many people who had experience in it, and frankly so many who were women who thought appropriately that education was key. I think historically that's not been the case, and I think that there really was a fascinating brawl for that. For me, I aimed myself at armed services and foreign affairs for other obvious reasons.
Well, that's great news. Yeah. I think, unless they're going to squabble.
Who?
The people who were battling to get into education.
No, they wanted to get there because it's so important, and I think that my role as one of their teammates, one of their classmates, is to be able to reach into them and talk about, I'll give you an example. I'm on armed services, and one of the subcommittees I'm on is something that's called Readiness. Only about 30% of the people who try to get into the military can, and that is because they're not ready. They don't have the education. They don't have the physical fitness. They're not ready. And so it's my challenge on the Readiness Committee to make sure that we are ready from, at any point in time. And so I will be working with Education and Labor to find the way to make sure that we are able to be ready. And it's one of the conversations that I've had across the committee lines and across, my community.
That's interesting.
You're listening to Schools In on SiriusXM, and we will be back with more with Representative Chrissy Houlahan on all things around Congress, education, readiness, and the military. And now we will start back up again. You guys are doing great. Here we go.
Really?
You're
really?
Okay, Dan. All right, here we go.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Schools In. You're listening to Schools In on SiriusXM. I am Denise Pope. I'm here with Dan Schwartz, and we are speaking with Representative Chrissy Houlahan. And I've got to ask about this. This is a little controversial, but
why do you look at me when you say that?
Well, because you could fire me as my as my boss. I want to ask about teacher strikes. It's been happening more and more. I don't know how you want to answer that. Do you have a feeling one way or the other?
Let me help.
Dan's going to help set it up.
Are people talking about this in Washington, the teacher strikes?
So I watched this happening throughout the course of when I was running, and it was happening in a lot of the states that many of my friends were running in, and it really gave me energy that teachers are some of the most important humans that we have in our communities, and they are so undervalued and underpaid. And in many cases undermined in the things that they do. And so there's an expression in Congress, reclaiming my time. Like, I'm kind of grateful that teachers are out there reclaiming their time, and reclaiming their importance in our communities.
And is the federal government thinking of having something to do with this? Or it's just going to leave it to the states?
I think I have not heard any conversations related to what you're asking in the nearly 100 days I've been here at the federal level. So I do believe that it largely sits at the state level.
Yeah.
So that wasn't as controversial as I thought it was going to be.
She came out in favor of it.
Yeah, well, and I think to empower teachers and to give them what they deserve, whether that's through a strike or not, right? I mean,
I came out in favor of the voice of teachers to make sure that they are treated fairly, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's do a little shift, because I know you've talked about early childhood literacy and have experience there, and you also have a place in your heart for STEM education. Tell us what you think would be, the best way to move forward in thinking about both of those areas. Like, we can start with one. Pick which one that you'd like to start with.
Well, literacy, it's where we have to start. And if we can't read, then we cannot do a lot of the other things that are required for the rest of our journey in education. And so the things that I was helpful in focusing on was the program I helped grow was one that focused on pre-K through fourth grade early childhood literacy, particularly in communities where kids were, in some cases, learning about 6 months and then falling about 3 months behind regularly. And as we know, that means that they just can't compete with kids who are not experiencing that same sort of loss. And so I think that's where we have to start, and we have to figure out ways not only to focus on their learning, but also to focus on parental engagement and the engagement of the community as well. And so one of the things that my program that we worked on focused on was making sure that it wasn't just the teacher's responsibility, that everything was not on the teacher all the time, that we were also integrating the parents and the people who love that child in the everyday learning experience. And I think that's also essential too, which is empowering the parent. I think especially in such a dangerous environment as we live in now, where gun safety and gun violence is a real pressing issue, we've created a fortress in the school that doesn't really welcome parents. They don't feel welcome, particularly parents who maybe aren't literate themselves or as literate as they'd like to be, or maybe English is not their first language. We've created an environment where they feel like it's a hostile, they have to penetrate the fortress that is the school. So that's one of the places that I would start. And then frankly, basic math skills. I mean, I talk a big game about STEM and STEAM, and I have a degree from Stanford and one from MIT, and that kind of stuff. But you do not have to have those degrees to be able to be fluent in numbers. The basic technical and vocational training that you need is not happening in this economy or in this country either. And so we need to be focused not just on higher education like the farm, but also on making sure that everybody who would like to have a job that might require things like being able to measure and count is able to do that.
Mm-hmm. So Denise, I'm going to ask you a question just to see what kind of rise I get.
Oh. This sometimes happens.
Getting a trend.
Bear with it.
So someone said to me the other day, I don't know why we need people to read, because from now on, you can hear it. You can always get speech. So people are watching, instead of reading textbooks, they're watching videos where there's a lecture. I can have my book read to me so I don't have to learn it. What do you think? Is this like a softball pitch?
Well, no. I mean, I'm a former high school English teacher.
Really?
I know that I say it a lot on the show. It's because I loved it, kind of like you loved what you were doing as a teacher. And I think that the experience of reading is profoundly different from the experience of listening or hearing. And actually, there's wonderful research out about sort of oral storytelling and what that can give people, and it is different. It's different skills. But I feel, as does Chrissy here, that literacy is paramount, and that you absolutely have to have the experience of.
So I was distinguishing literacy, which is sort of understanding
and reading.
You don't think reading's going to go the way of the slide rule?
I really hope it doesn't.
Okay, just test it.
We are speaking with Chrissy Houlahan, and we're talking about her role.
I'd like to be on the record that I'm pro-reading.
Yeah, thank you. You heard it here first. Pro-reading. Dan, are you pro-reading?
Yeah, I am pro-reading. But you do need to entertain the alternatives.
I think, and there's absolutely skills to be
like
learned
good leadership entertains the alternatives, and it helps you harden your position, or
you can reach across the aisle.
You got it.
You said something that I'm just sort of fascinated by. What is the readiness in education that someone needs for the military? Because that was sort of like, I hadn't thought about that before. What do you see them needing from an education standpoint?
So there are the equivalent of sort of exams that you take. So
okay.
you're sort of assessed by how you do on those exams, and there's baseline assessment required, similar to a lot of different things, gateways that we go through in any other career that we'd like to pursue. There's also physical readiness as well, and that's not necessarily that you have. One of my cousins is really involved in the military. I still have 4 active duty cousins, and they're very, very fit. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about making sure that you are healthy, and this gets to social justice issues as well. Issues where the climate is changing, particularly affect communities like the ones that I was teaching in. And my kids regularly had asthmatic attacks and those kinds of things. You are not ready if you have asthma, and that is also a problem.
Right, and if you live in a food desert and you can't put healthy things into your body, right? Yeah, and as you think about that, it's like what's good for the military is good for everyone, right? Everyone needs to have this kind of readiness.
That's why I'm grateful that I have the ability to sort of reach into this really important conversation of education through the lens of where I sit in Congress.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. We have a few minutes left, Dan. Do you have something to say?
I would like to return to the question of leadership. I've seen this over and over where people are trying, they come and they speak at Stanford and they try to convince people to engage in public service. And so one answer is you let them see role models of people who are in public service. Other levers we can try?
I can only speak from my own experience, and I feel as though we are in a really interesting change period right now where I feel like it's becoming fashionable again to be involved in service in this way, in leadership by serving and things like what I am doing. A new generation, the younger generation of people really want to make sure they're bringing their whole selves to work, and that means they want to bring their entire they don't want to be a different person at work than they are at home. They want to bring all of their ethical and moral values, everywhere they go with them. And I think that that's great because that means that hopefully our nation will be more healthy as a result, and that people will be better leaders when they do that. So I think that we are in a really important inflection point. My freshman roommate became my roommate for 4 years at Stanford, and she went into the Peace Corps right after I graduated. I went to the military. She went into the Peace Corps. Her whole life, our whole lives, has now been teaching either through the Peace Corps or through, she's an English teacher on Native American reservations, first in Arizona and then up in the Washington State area. And she's a servant. She's a leader in and of herself. She has created so many millennial scholars I can't even count. So I'm not despondent about this. I think we have hope.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like there's lots of different ways to serve.
So at Stanford, there's Haas public service, and this is kind of the gateway drug into education. They go out and they serve in the community, and they begin to see how satisfying this is.
You have one here in this building who actually works here. Michaela Sminsky was just downstairs. I ran into her. She was an undergrad at Stanford. My daughter went to Stanford too, and she came and worked with me at Springboard, and now she's here. So she's definitely part of the Haas School.
Yeah.
So we do our part to produce these kinds of civil servants.
Civil servants who keep their sights high. That's what we want.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
So appreciate it. Thank you to our audience. Wonderful audience. And thank you to all the listeners listening to Schools In on SiriusXM. If you missed any part of this episode, you can listen on SoundCloud or on the Sirius app. Okay, so the radio show is over, and now we get to go to the second half.
He's still looking through the camera.
Because we're still live on Facebook. This is still live. It's just not radio. Now we're just not radio. Now it's just us and...
Wait, now it's us and Facebook.
And
the rest of the world.
We have another wonderful guest here.
Yes, we do. We have a new segment. So this is not the radio show. This is more interactive. So Denise, if you would sit down for a second.
I am sitting.
Sorry,
do you want me to go over there? Okay.
Over there. So often what we do in these events is we bring people up who know something about education, we talk to them, and then we open up the questions. So one person, and usually it's a combination of faculty and students. So first I'd like to welcome Jessica Stovall. She's a first-year doctoral student at the GSE. She's in our new interdisciplinary race, inequality, and language in education program. She's also a teaching fellow in the Stanford Teacher Education Program. She taught English at Oak Park River Forest High School in the Chicago suburbs. Last year, she was one of the teachers profiled in the STARS documentary, America to Me, which explored race and segregation in high schools. And before that, she received a Fulbright Distinguished Award in teaching and spent a semester in Wellington, New Zealand. And if that's not enough, she took my intro stats class and got the best test grade of all. So very special. Our second guest is a tremendous surprise. It is Denise Pope. Thank you. So Denise is a senior lecturer at the Graduate School of Education. She specializes in student engagement, curriculum studies, qualitative research methods, and service learning. She's also co-founder of Challenge Success, and this provides schools and families with tools they need to raise healthy and motivated students. And she earned her BA and PhD from Stanford. So welcome. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
It's on now. Got it.
So let me start with you. How did you end up in teaching?
How did I end up in teaching? I was an English major at Stanford, and I had tried... I had worked at the radio show, and I thought I was going to go into...
Wait a minute.
I worked at KZSU. I
did not have my own. I
didn't have my own show. I was a news reporter, so I would literally just rip the AP wire. It took a lot of effort. Rip the AP wire and read it on the air, and then no, I never had my own show. You're the first. We're the first. I thought I was going to go into media and communication and journalism, and I worked for broadcast news in the summer and realized it was just not for me. And then I thought, well, let's try children's media. And I worked for a children's producer the following summer. It was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's how I said it, right?
Yeah.
And I realized it also wasn't for me. Like, I just didn't, it was too Hollywood, like infighting stuff, and I don't know. So I got to senior year and thought, I don't know what I want to be. But I was an RA. I was a camp counselor for years. I have 2 younger siblings. And I thought, really, if you look back at my life, the things that I've really enjoyed doing was in a teaching position. So that's how I applied to not the Stanford program, a different university's GSE, and did that for a year. Got a master's and certification to teach and started teaching.
Wow. How about you, Jessica? How'd you get in?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
I come from a legacy of teachers. My mom taught 3rd grade for 37 years before she retired, and my dad is a university professor of school psychology in a graduate program. So I always, when they ask you what you want to be when you grow up, when you're in kindergarten, it was always teacher. All the way up until like sophomore year of high school, I wanted to be a marine biologist for some reason. And then I went back to teacher, and I've been there ever since. So it's kind of always been something I've wanted to do. I feel like it's in my blood. And
so now so it hurt. Like when I stopped teaching to go back to school, it sort of hurt because I enjoyed teaching. Yeah. But so what led you to sort of leave teaching to move up, basically in a leadership role one way or another? What?
So the great thing is I don't feel like you can ever really leave teaching, right? Like I might physically not be in, room 313, like screaming my heart out and having fun with high schoolers, but I still feel like that's still in the way that I walk and perceive the world. And really for me, it was that Fulbright in New Zealand. The opportunity to spend an entire semester really thinking deeply about how New Zealand is supporting its Indigenous Māori in their educational systems. And I was able to ask questions and interview and observe. And I went to 14 different schools, and I worked with the Undersecretary of Ministry of Education. And I was really surprised at my capacity to think deeply about this issue. And so when I got back, there was just something that had changed in my role as an educator. I felt like I just wanted to do more. I wanted to explore more because I really needed to be challenged to really be the best teacher I was in the first place. And so I started doing consulting and professional development in the area. And then after a few years, I decided I really wanted to go back and think about this in a more full-time capacity.
Huh. How about you? What sort of led you to leave it behind to do grander
so
things?
I was frustrated. I was talking to more, parole officers than parents at one point, and I was frustrated that I wasn't reaching the kids in a way that I wanted to, and I tried to make changes from within, but it was just really, really hard. And I thought, I think it'll be better for me to get out and make changes from without. So what I actually did is I did a stint as a college teacher at Santa Clara, teaching freshman English, and I loved it. And I only had a master's degree at that point, and they got a new president at Santa Clara who said, we want everyone to have a PhD who's teaching the undergrads. And so I had to decide, PhD in English, become sort of like a scholar of Virginia Woolf, kind of narrow, or PhD in education. There's nothing wrong with a PhD in English, but that was a choice that I had to make, and I chose education, and very glad I did.
So why don't you explain to people what challenge success is? Because it's basically an organization that now tries to change it from the outside in instead of the inside out.
Exactly. So my doctoral dissertation at Stanford, actually under Elliot Eisner, was I shadowed 5 high school kids for a year. I did an ethnography, and this was at a high achieving school, and these were high achieving kids, and I was studying what worked. And what I found was it wasn't working. That these kids were getting good grades, but they were doing school. That's actually the name of the book. That each kid helped me write his or her own chapter, and they were sort of playing the game of school and not really engaged. But more importantly, they were really hurting physically, mentally. And the head of the Cowell Health Center, which is now Vaden, called me up into his office at Stanford and said, we have the aftermath of the kids in your book here at Stanford. We have kids who got really good grades but are not engaged. We have kids who are having panic attacks and anxiety.
So what do you do about it?
And that's what he said. He basically said, what do we do? So we created this intervention where we go into schools and we survey, we find out what is the health and well-being status of the kids, how engaged or disengaged are they, and we work with each school, give them a coach, and help them think about what are the changes they need to make to school practices, to school policies, to parent education, to what goes on in the classroom and what goes on outside the classroom to make for a much healthier and more engaging place to be. And we've been around now for 15 years, and we've worked with hundreds of schools.
I know you have like revivals where like thousands of people come and
we fill Memorial Auditorium.
Yeah.
It's great, and it's really fulfilling to be able to. It is from the outside coming in, but it's very school by school. So I'm a student of Larry Cuban and David Tyack, and it's definitely sort of one school at a time kind of change, which is slow. But if you do it for 15 years, you reach hundreds of schools.
If this were schools in, I have a question, but it's not. So,
okay, I get off the hook.
So tell us about America for me.
So America to me is a 10-part docuseries that follows the year in the life of Oak Park River Forest High School. And what is really powerful about it is it really is a microcosm of what's happening in public schools all across the United States. And so it tells the story through the eyes of 12 very different, diverse high school students. And you get to know the impact of the pervasiveness of racism and some institutional practices that have really been impacting them. And so what I love about it is, we see lots of statistics about how Black and brown students are being harmed by school systems, but to actually walk in their shoes and really see how complex this issue is really powerful. And it's also incredibly funny. You forget how awkward and strange it is to be a high school student, and to go back and relive that is really wonderful. And so it was a really amazing project to be a part of. It was they had about 1,600 hours of footage that they had to cut down to the 10 and a half.
So did you sign beforehand? Did you retain the rights to say you can't use that footage?
So what I do really appreciate about Cartumpkin Films that made the documentary is we were all able to see our footage before it went to final editing. So I was able to, there was very few scenes that I had some edits for, but there was a couple of scenes that I was like, I really don't feel comfortable with, thousands of people seeing that. So we were able to work, and they were very willing to work with me on that. But I think what was interesting is they had told me, I was like, oh, we'll be in your room for a week or two. And then they were in my room for a year and a half. And they saw the good, the bad, the ugly. You see everything in there. Yeah. But what I do appreciate is, thinking about the role of teacher advocates and teacher resistance. I mean, I felt very silenced in my particular learning environment and teaching environment. And I thought, this was so wonderful to finally feel like I had a voice. I had a sense of agency. So
let me both ask you this question. Is there a way, so we prepare teachers, is there a way to prepare them to be advocates? Because they may, when I think of it, I generally think of advocacy for their children. But is there a way to prepare them for this? Are there lessons that the teachers could learn before they step in the classroom?
Is there something you wish you had known that, would you say? Thank you,
co-host.
Well, I think just what's been so powerful as a result of this documentary is, the only difference between me and thousands of my colleagues is that I got a film crew, right? The stuff that I'm doing in my classroom is not necessarily innovative or unique. It's just that we don't necessarily get that sense of agency. We don't get that representative, all the things we were doing in our classrooms. And so I think that sometimes we just need to feel like we're not alone. And so having these really brave spaces where we can talk about the unique challenges of being a teacher, and that we do have the capacity to make change, that we can argue for better for our students, is really, really powerful. And so I think that's one main thing I learned as a result of the documentary, is that there's so many of us that are feeling this way, and we just needed to be like, oh, I'm represented. Somebody understands what it's like to be me, and we've been collaborating on some really important things. And so I think that access and that space to know that you're not alone is really important.
And I would add, and this is something that we definitely do at Challenge Success and also at the GSC, is to teach them the research behind school change, because actually teachers have an enormous amount of control what they do in the classroom, and you can close your door and you can kind of let the wave of reform roll over you and get away without making those changes, but you have power. And I teach a curriculum class, and I talk about curriculum as a Trojan horse for school reform. What you do in the classroom makes a difference. It is mind altering, for good or for bad. And I think as people come through schools of education and with the teachers we work with in the schools that we work with at Challenge Success, teaching them their role and teaching them what the levers of change are, it always works better if you have buy-in from the top and from the bottom, right? And this sort of top-down, let's make a law and make everybody do it, that's really not the best way. And particularly when you look that teachers aren't usually in the room when those laws are being made.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to open it up if people have questions. You have the world's expert in curriculum development and admission scandals.
Yeah.
If it comes to mind. And then you have Jessica, who is probably one of the most expert people on teaching and the portrayal of teachers and the efforts they do with their kids. And so if people... Or you can ask me. I don't really know much, but I'm happy to.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having the panel tonight. I know Jess, so I want to ask her a question about stepping into leadership. And I know a little bit about your journey, and I would love to hear from you your perspective on how other teachers, just others, can step into potential and step from one good period of work to another period of work to maximize the value you can have to a field, to a student, et cetera.
Thank you for your question, Holly. I think what's been really powerful to me is to recognize how much power and capacity as a teacher I have to make change. I really genuinely believe that teachers are change makers, that we can be that lever that can make that difference. And so I think part of that is recognizing that in order for us as teachers to be the leaders that our students deserve is allowing ourselves to also grow, right? The one thing that was really difficult for me as an educator is that we are not necessarily seen as experts. We're not seen as scholars, as deep thinkers, but we are. And I think that taking the time to do the Fulbright, to experience things from another perspective and another whole side of the world, to engage in professional development that was really challenging to me about my perceptions about the world and in race in particular, was really, really powerful for me. And then when I started to shift and focus more on global education in my classroom, I noticed that there was just a lot more that I could be doing for my students and for my community. And so that allowed me to dream bigger by physically taking the time to remove myself from my circumstance, to grow myself, to challenge myself. I was able to see bigger. And I think that the same happens with our classrooms. When our students see more of the world, when they see more of what's happening, they also step beyond themselves. I think providing that access as being role models as teachers is really important.
Thanks. Everyone's been so articulate, and I'm scared to do this, but I was really taken by your comments about how we want to your program that's working with students at high schools to really be healthy and make it to college and be engaged. I think this may have gone off, or maybe I'm not holding it. But I'm sitting here with my junior daughter who is looking at the process of going to college, and she is also very engaged in the education system. I'm a teacher. And I'm wondering what our universities, our top-level universities, what part they have to play in this whole process, because it's not just down, up, it's also up, down, and I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I feel your pain. I know exactly what you're going through. I have 3 kids who have my last just finished the process, and so there's good news to be had here. There is much more, there's a greater awareness on the part of the universities about their role in fostering unhealthy environments at the high school level around college admissions. And there's actually a report out of Harvard's School of Education, and it's called Turning the Tide. And they just put out Turning the Tide #2. And what it shows is many, many, many deans of admissions at universities across the United States are working to make changes. They're working really hard to be much more transparent when it comes to college admissions. They're changing things like, are they requiring SAT or ACT, or are they going to be a test optional school? Because we know that the SAT and the ACT are racially biased tests. They're coachable tests. They correlate with zip code. And there's pretty good studies out that show that when you go to be test optional, you will get more applicants from underserved populations. So there's changes afoot at the university level, and I do think people are slowly making those changes. And at the same time, what we say is you can't control that as an everyday person, as a junior going through this, but what you can do is control your actions and make sure that you're taking a healthy schedule, not a crazy 8 APs at a time kind of schedule, that you're sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night as an adolescent, which is really, really important. I'm looking at your face. I totally know how hard that is, but that's really important. And that you don't take the SAT 15 times, and that you don't start prepping for the PSAT in 7th grade, and that you don't spend all this money on tutoring and coaching, and look where that gets you, right? So we're trying to have people take a healthy approach to college admissions. And the biggest finding that we just reported in our college admissions white paper, which you can download from the Challenge Success website, is that there really isn't a correlation between where you go to school, how selective it is, and a whole bunch of outcomes: learning, job satisfaction, well-being, even financial outcomes. So have a look at that paper. It really is supposed to kind of dial down the stress around the whole college admissions process and say it's much more about what you do at university than where you go. And I think if you can keep that in mind, you'll have a healthier approach.
Hi, here in Washington, D.C., there's been a movement towards, I'm an early childhood educator, and there's been a movement towards the professionalization of the early childhood education, transitioning from childcare into teaching at the early, for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and pre-kindergarten. What do you see the role of the university in preparing the profession or the workforce in the early childhood years toward that goal, toward the professionalization and the creating of standards of what that actually means?
I just pointed at Dan because this is something I know he likes to talk about that we're doing at the School of Ed, is early childhood preparation.
Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, public will is going to matter here a lot. Pre-K teachers don't get paid a lot. If you suddenly require them to have a BA and certified, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for that daycare? So these are big questions. I think what we're doing right now is we've created a task force of faculty from medical school, psychology, business, policy in the GSE to try and figure out what is it the university can especially do in the early childhood space. So some of this will be discovery. Some of it's going to be trying to figure out how to improve the articulation between doctor care and teacher care, right? Because that's the systems change up to the age of 4. You know, your doctor is the primary caregiver. They could be doing educational assessments. Then it goes to the schools, and there's sort of a break between those two. So I think it's a great question, you know, and the answer to the labor questions, I don't know, right? This is how much does America care about its children? How much is it willing to spend? So I just, this morning, decided to take a peek at this. So the average expenditures on healthcare over a lifetime is about $360,000. The average expenditures for K-12 education that's going to prepare you for a lifetime is about 130. Right, so it's quite, we spend our money to avoid loss as opposed to spending our money to cultivate futures. So we'll see if America decides to jump in on this, you know, but I think it's really important. Yeah. So we have time for, thank you. It is so rare I get to state my own opinion. I really appreciate it. So we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to wind it down.
Thank you. So that was an excellent segue, actually, to my question, talking about how much do we care about America's children. I was just curious if you all could maybe speak about some ideas you have to equitably and sustainably incentivize integration along race and class lines in American public schools. Thank you.
You go second. I mean, it's hugely important, right? We now know so much more that problems will be solved in a better way with diversity in classrooms, in workforce, in schools of education, and we're trying at all of those levels to increase it. And I can say I'll take Stanford as an example. I'm super proud that Stanford admissions has admitted 20% of the freshman class is first generation to go to college. That's a really big deal, and I think they're doing an excellent job of recruiting and actually getting kids to come. And now they have to figure out how to get them to persist. And Stanford has a very, very high percentage of kids who persist. Very few kids who come to Stanford end up dropping out of Stanford. And yet there's just little things that we because we haven't had this many, and 20% isn't enough, right? It has to be even more. But because we haven't had this many first gens on campus, we don't think about things like it's common for the campus to close down for a week at winter break, and you shut out all the lights and everybody leaves. Well, these kids don't have enough money to fly back home for winter break. We need to keep a dorm open. We need to keep at least, one food hall open. And so we're learning sort of the hard way, but I think it's a nice model to show that if universities can do this, and certainly schools and classrooms can do this, and I'll let Jess speak to that, and we're trying at the School of Ed to recruit and really diversify our professors. But you've got to have a pipeline of people. We can search and scour and try to get the best early childhood professor, let's say. But if the pipeline's not there, it's really hard to fill it. So it's got to start down here. I mean, I'm pointing to you, but at the early K-12 level and keep it going.
So I could talk about this all day. This is exactly everything that gets me up in the morning. And so my challenge is to try to find ways to eliminate racial predictabilities of student academic achievement. And that's really what I'm devoting everything that I am for. And I think for me, it is, there's so much red tape. There's so much bureaucracy. There's so many, lines of communication that are difficult to find. And I have found that, like many teachers, often just close the door and do their work that they need to do in the four walls of their classroom. But then the reality is those students have to leave those spaces and go off into spaces that don't necessarily support their multiple identities. So if we continue to remain siloed, we're not going to get anywhere. So where I have actually made the most progress is in the students themselves, right? So we have really serious and brave and open conversations about race and equity. We lay it on the table, we look at data, we analyze the issues, and students actually create action plans, they give presentations, they become activists. And so one of the things that's happening at Oak Park, which is really amazing, is students are doing all these amazing protests and walkouts and sit-ins, and as a result, they've gotten a racial equity policy. They're hiring a brand new director of equity in education. They're going and working with other schools or pushing the middle schools and elementary schools to get them involved. And so I think that what we have noticed, through Parkland and other things that are going along in the U.S., there's a lot to be said by our young people who have great voices. And so I see my job as a teacher is just to elevate those and amplify those and then get out of the way and really let them take over. So I think one of the things too is, like, as a teacher, I don't have a lot of control of whatever happens above me, but I can really provide pathways and access for those students that I'm working with.
So that is like the perfect ending to a segment on leadership, where you're giving it to the kids to be the civics, the future leaders. So I would love to thank, I will thank Denise and Jessica for their time, and then we'll wrap up very briefly. So thank you very much. Thank you. So I think we've been running long, so I'm going to bring it home. Well, evidently I'm not going to bring it home. So yes, I am. Look away. Just look away.